What's up, everyone, and welcome back to yet another episode of the Off Grid podcast. Thanks a lot for joining yet again in for the new year. We've had an absolute belt of a year with some awesome guests, so I thought it'd be a good time to just reflect on how far we've got and how the podcast is all going, what I've learned from all of the guests, but also what I've learned from doing the podcast itself. This is the first episode where I'm actually videoing myself to the camera. Never had it before where it's just me. I usually have a guest or something like that. So this feels weird, I've got to say. Because you're talking and you're trying to be engaging, but no one's actually here. No one's actually in the room. Maybe it would be easier if there was like a camera person or something. So it just felt like I was talking to someone. But yeah, this is full influencer style, guys. So we're going for it. Okay, so this episode, what I thought we would do is share 10 lessons that I've learned from the podcast, 5 from the guests and 5 from what I've learned in just doing this podcast. So let's get into it. Why not? Let's do this thing. So first one is from a more recent podcast. I've learned this from a guest called Mark Beaumont. Now, he asked the question, do you feel like you're in the driving seat of your own career? And this kind of puts into perspective the idea of like, are you just looking for opportunities? Am I just waiting for opportunities to come and then taking them and kind of going with the flow and going from one step to the next? And you kind of make this retrospective story of progression because you either get like promoted or it's a new exciting opportunity. But are you actually driving that? Are you actually in control of that journey? And it really got me, that question, because it made me think, okay, how can I set a goal for a year's time, 5 years' time, and then work backwards from that so that the journey and the plan is mine. It's what I've set out to do. So I'm in the driving seat for that, rather than just kind of going from one thing to the next and not really having like any vision as to where it is that I'm going. So yeah, that one really hit me. Mark Beaumont, fastest person to cycle around the world. Yeah, absolute beast. So clearly he's definitely been through a lot of experiences where he's set his mind to something and been really single-minded about achieving what others thought were impossible. But he said himself that impossible is just something that people haven't yet done. So it's this idea of just like, how can you be in the driving seat of your own career? How can you really lead in what you're doing? All right, next up is less is more. Now, this is kind of something I've learned from a guest, but also been implementing into the podcast loads, because it was from a really early guest called Hector Hughes. Hector is the co-founder of a company called Unplugged, and they do cabins in nature, but his whole philosophy around business is really heavily influenced by all of his experiences in Buddhist practices and practicing meditation. He's done silent meditation retreats and all things like this. So less is more. The idea that he's talking about 90% of all the work that we do is pointless. And that if we really look at how we spend our days, we're just obsessed with this idea of feeling productive. We always want this sense of busyness in our lives. And I think there's so many things that we can all look at in our lives, whether it's just like half an hour or an hour every single day, where it's just busyness. It's just stuff. It's just scrolling, or you feel like you're productive because you're checking emails, but it's nothing. It doesn't actually progress you in any way. And the way that Hector kind of approaches his work is by first understanding what are those few things, talking like 1, 2, 3 things that are really important for whatever it is you're doing, whether you're like building a business or moving on in your career or wanting to get really fit or, whatever it is, particularly at this time of year with everyone's got New Year's resolutions and there's always a sense of like needing to go somewhere. A lot of people have goals at this point in the year. Just sit with yourself and think, what is actually really important here? What are the key factors that drive you to get to where you want to go? And then how do you maximize your time so that everything you do, ideally, is on those few things? So there's no noise. It's just 100% focus on, it's all, I think I've heard people say it, signal. Like there's signal and then there's noise. How do you make all of your workload 100% signal and 0% noise? So there's just no bullcrap. There's none of that shit that's just kind of cloudiness, nothingness, busyness. Just get it done and focus on what really matters. That's been something that massively helped me in this podcast, particularly in terms of consistency. And I'm really glad that I was able to have that conversation with Hector early on in this podcast. Alrighty, next up, I want to talk about something I've learned from guests, which is the power in youth and naivety, and just how I think a lot of people can see it as something that's negative, that you're not experienced or you somehow don't have like the prerequisites required to go and achieve your dream. But actually, the best thing you can have in your youth is just this sense of like, I can attitude. It could be called naivety. It could be called anything you want. But what I realized in all my guests is from a young age, loads of them just had this sense of agency to back their own ideas and not just kind of dream about it, but actually think like, yeah, I'm going to do it. So I was thinking about the mindset to achieve the impossible with, Raf Jackson. He was a 19-year-old who is the youngest Brit to run the Marathon des Sables, which is like the ultimate ultra running through the Sahara Desert. He did it at age 19 with no training. And just talking to him about that period of time, the thing that was so surprising about Raf was that he wasn't really into fitness. You'd expect someone who goes out and does something like that at a young age to have like an obsession with either fitness or achievement, or this kind of restless, extreme character that would be drawn to doing something like that. And he was none of that, which was, it made for a great conversation because I was just like, what's kind of behind this guy? What's driving him to do this? Which we got into and it was great. But it made me realize how this guy who was running a 5K and he was sick twice, so he was so unfit. And at the end of that run, he said, I'm going to run the Marathon des Sables. I'm so unfit, I'm going to run the Marathon des Sables. He did no training for it and still managed to complete it because his mindset was just so strong. It's kind of hard for me to explain why he was able to do that because I don't know. I don't actually understand what that mindset is because I haven't done that. But talking in that conversation with Raf, it was clear that from a young age, he just had this kind of gung-ho attitude of being like, yeah, I'll give it a crack and I'll probably succeed. Like that sort of just, a brilliant skill to have in your youth. Another guest of mine, Megan Hine, she first went on her wild camp when she was age 13. She was also one of the first women to trial the Royal Marines training base. So all these things from a really young age were like propelling Megan in her career to kind of set a new bar for herself and realize what she was capable of from a really young age, and has since gone on to do loads of security and risk work for TV crews around the world in really remote dangerous parts and worked with Bear Grylls and all things like this. But it was clear that from her childhood experiences, she was so self-sufficient. And from a young age, being able to enjoy that is quite the skill. And having that confidence in yourself to know that you can go wild camping age 13. I mean, that just seems crazy for me. Like I did my first solo wild camp when I was 19 or 20, went out to the Brecon Beacons, went for a couple of nights, and it was great. It was amazing. It was so peaceful. It's something particularly on your own, just realizing like what thoughts come up when you're not kind of distracted in conversation and things like that. It was really beneficial. But that first night, I was bricking it. Like I was pretty nervous going into it because it's just, I think, that kind of primal sense of like, if you've got someone with you, just that sense of feeling safety in numbers. And then when you're on your own, it's like, oh shit, well, I hope I'm going to be all right. So yeah, just, she was clearly able to develop that sense in herself of like, yeah, I've got this. I know what I can do, and knowing what you're capable of from a really young age. Another guest, George Bullard, he was 19 when he set the world record for the longest unsupported polar expedition, which is just crazy. You know, went for nearly 4 months away from home, just him and another guy that he had met only twice before the expedition. And that other guy was 21, you know, going out there age 19 and being that self-sufficient, being that alone and that capable from a young age. I've noticed in so many of my guests as just this massive like propulsion. I'm doing like an archery there. I'm pulling it back and boom, full Cupid. But yeah, it's definitely clear that a young age, having that naivety, having that sense of like, I'm going to go do something that just seems impossible. It's brilliant. Even if you fail, it's brilliant because you're giving it a go. You're training that mindset. And I feel like you could look at society now and look how many people are sort of mollycoddled and babied and, you know, protected. You don't really see many people kind of pushing themselves to limits from a young age. It would almost be seen as unhealthy, you know, to, oh, here's a child age 13, why don't you go wild camping? Or yeah, my 19-year-old, he's just left school and he's gonna go and set a world record on a polar expedition. It kind of makes you think like, really? Is that safe? Is that dangerous? There's just kind of this natural default that we have within our society at the moment of, just kind of taking it a bit more easy. And I think that there's probably a price to pay for that. With maybe you could relate it to seeing us kind of growing up later in life now, you know, particularly with like housing crisis and things like this. For a 25-year-old to be living at home with their mum and dad and still very much in that sort of child role is really common. Like it's so common now. Whereas only, 40 years ago, you were seeing like 18-year-olds as military officers at war. And those guys still do exist, but they are few and far between. And I feel like if we're able to kind of push our children to kind of just explore their limits, not kind of imposing limits on them and being like, you need to do this and you need to like go to the max, but just being like, what do you want to do? And they'll say something amazingly creative and really ambitious and utterly naive. And they should give it a go. Set the parameters in place and go for it. Okay, next up is the theme of people being behind the achievement, knowing that whenever I get these guests on, there's always a sense of in some cases, intimidation by how big this guest is. You know, how many followers they got, or they've been on TV, or just how renowned they are, and things like that. And I do have to check myself every now and then, just be like, it is just a human being. Like, it's probably not helpful to sort of be starstruck by these guests, because ultimately what I've realized is they are all just working out life. No one, no matter how sort of famous they are, or how sort of skilled they are in their niche, whatever it is, no one has got life figured out. And what was so refreshing was with Bruna. Bruna, he's part of the most elite regiment in the British military. He's part of the mountain leaders in the Royal Marines. Very skilled, highly trained, and just a real lover for the mountains. And he spoke about having imposter syndrome on his mountain leader course, where he's literally sat there at night with his eyes wide open. Everyone else around him is asleep, and he's literally thinking like, what am I doing here? What is actually going on? Am I really meant to be here? And just questioning if he was like truly capable of getting on through that course. And even now he was a mountain leader, even still sort of looking at his colleagues and thinking like, wow, like they're the real deal. But never quite believing it himself. It's sort of, yeah, just kind of reveals the person behind these big achievements and all these things that we get wowed by, and actually then you see what's really driving them and who that person is. And I felt really lucky to sort of to see that vulnerable side of, you know, what is an extremely alpha and macho label to that person. So yeah, Bruna, absolute dude. And the other person I was speaking about was Chaz Powell. He's done loads of big treks where he's walked the length of all the wildest African rivers from source to sea. You know, some taking months on end. He walked the length of the Zambezi. He's nearly died of dehydration and things like this. Just a really accomplished expedition leader and adventurer. And even he spoke about how he felt different to other adventurers, because most adventurers come from this sort of like well brought up childhood, and they've gone and explored the world, and they're well spoken and even probably well educated. And this is all like quite typical stereotypes of adventurers, particularly from England. But Chaz wasn't that at all. You know, he opened up about being in a young offenders institution at age 19 and just sat there next to a guy who's just murdered someone, thinking, what the fuck am I doing here? You know, what is this really my life? Is this what I want? And then using travel and adventure as a way to get out of that, but still, you know, but behind all of those big achievements and this man who's an incredible adventurer, is that 19-year-old self. And I think we can all relate to that. You know, as we get older, there's still a part of that child within us, and those experiences we had that ultimately drive us as we get into our adult years. So yeah, that was a very nice realization, just realizing that these incredible guests are just people and they're all humans. Next up, and the last one I learned from all these guests, is to back yourself. You know, like all of these guests, the one thing that they had in common was they had a crazy idea, an expedition, a business, whatever it was, and they thought, I've got this idea and I'm actually going to do it, and dedicated themselves for years and decades to achieving that dream. Now that's extremely rare. I'm sure we've all got dreams, we've all got ideas, and you know, we've all got those mates who you go down to the pub and they're talking about like, oh, that I've got this idea, I'm thinking about doing this business, or I've got this big expedition in mind, or whatever it is, and it never happens. Whereas all of these guests, one thing they had in common was that they gave it a go and they gave it a good crack and they did it over a really long period of time. So Holly Budge, she has like one of the largest charities for female rangers worldwide. So she's got like, I think 5,500 female rangers across the world who are literally changing the game in the way that you approach anti-poaching in countries like Africa, but all over the world as well, that she's doing with her amazing charity. So yeah, she was kind of driven by that purpose, and really thought, you know what, I'm a white English lady that's gonna head over to Africa and help female rangers get into these parts of the world where they can truly help the fight against poaching, and make a big difference. So yeah, just that sense of like being like, oh, okay, so this English person's just going to turn up and start a massive charity and make like a real impact in countries where they're not even from. I think it would be quite easy to sort of, if your friend was saying that they were thinking of doing that, you'd say, oh, that might prove tricky because you're not actually from that country. But yeah, just really backed herself and went for it, and now has the success to sort of prove the idea right, thankfully. And another guest of mine, Tristan Gooley, he has carved his own career, but not in like the typical sense of like someone that is just starting a business or doing something on their own terms. He actually not only carved out his own path, but literally built his own industry called natural navigation. So it's not like he was like, I'm going to start up a fish and chip shop, or I'm going to start a podcast where you guys all know what those things are. He was like, I'm going to pursue a career in natural navigation. And the whole world is like, what's that? So yeah, just a very, very dogged mindset to kind of invent your own industry and then pursue your own path within that. It's so cool. And I think, all the more credit because it must be incredibly hard work. And talking to him about that conversation, we spoke loads about natural navigation and his area. But we also spoke about doing your own thing, and pursuing your own path in life, because that was a massive part of who he was and something that he really stands for. So there you have it. Those are the 5 lessons I've learned from the guests. It's been a massive education learning from all these guests and really understanding like what it is that drives them and who that person is, which is an amazing experience to have, particularly when it's an in-person podcast, because they're right in front of you. And you can't, there's no hiding. So it makes for a really, really great conversation. And for me, it's like my own university. It's like the degree that I always wanted to do. I went to uni and did business and I hated like all 4 years of it. But just the degree, everything else was really fun, but the degree wasn't great. And then when I'm doing this podcast, I'm thinking, wow, I'm learning so much about life, about the outdoors, and about all these people doing incredible things. So yeah, learning as I go. And what I thought I would do, given that I've done this podcast now, I think we're on episode 27 now. I thought that I'd reflect on 5 key lessons that I've learned throughout doing this podcast, and ultimately how I'm feeling about it going forward. So first one, and this is kind of the ultimate cliche because you hear it everywhere, so I'll try and make it more sort of personalized. But the first lesson I've learned from doing this podcast is consistency. There's something so unique about running a podcast because it demands consistency. Like you have to post another episode, because if you don't, like after a period of time, you don't have a podcast anymore. So it's like, it just absolutely necessitates more. And I think that's the beauty of the podcast as well, is you can literally see your progress stacked one on top of the other. If I go back and listen to episode 1, it is so different from how it is now. And like, if I was to do this 5 months ago when I started, I don't think I would be able to do it, just because I've got way more confident in my abilities to speak off the cuff, and to go for it. So consistency has been the ultimate teacher, because you really have no option but to get better. If you just keep going, you're gonna get better. And this is the simplicity of the podcast business model, and the way that I am approaching this podcast that I love so much, is you just gotta keep going. That's it, really, as far as I'm concerned. Like, because the more you keep going, the better I'm gonna get at doing all the different tasks involved in running the podcast. So you don't need to like say, oh, I must get better at editing. Like, you will, but you just need to keep editing as a result. So just keep doing the podcast, keep going. By the time you get to episode 50, most people have given up. In fact, it's something crazy. It's like 90% of podcasts fail after 3 episodes, or something like that, or 98%. And then of that 2% or 10% left, they only get to episode 21. So I'm already at episode 20, which technically means I'm in the top 1% of podcasts, just by the pure fact that I've kept going, which is great. Which is great. So I sort of put these frameworks in place to enable consistency, to just keep going. And one of those is just to not look at the metrics. Like, you get all these analytics and stuff of how many views you're getting, and where people are listening from, which are fun to look at from time to time, but don't take them seriously. I don't take any of that seriously, because I'm just like, it's all about consistency. It's not about looking at all the views and the listens and stuff like that at the moment. And it will get to that at one point, but right now it's just about consistency. Just keep publishing episodes. And that enables a great sense of creativity, because I can try different formats. Like, I never tried this format before, where I'm just me on my own talking to you guys through the camera. And it allows that freedom just to try different things, do it online, switch up the way that I'm doing my questions, just have fun with it and explore and try different places. Yeah, I've done like a podcast in the outdoors with my friend Cuthbert. I've done podcasts in people's homes where I've gone to their office, or we've met up in a park somewhere. Loads and loads of different stuff. So yeah, consistency, that's the way to go. And I set an obligation each week to make sure that it happens. So I'll have a set day for recording, and I'll have a set day for publishing. So every Thursday, 7 a.m, publish. The episode comes out. And that means once you kind of book in those guests and you've got all the recording days in line, you kind of don't really have a choice now but to be consistent. You just keep this flow going. And this is something I'm learning more and more looking into the future. How can I like build systems to just keep this thing going, to just have the guests lined up, have a constant workflow to go through, and make sure that I can keep being consistent, posting an episode every single week. That's the main thing. And off the back of that is this idea of the long game. I think this is probably the first time in my life where I'm able to sort of look at the long game. I've always seen my life as like a year chunk every now and then. I guess that's just the nature of uni, each year, second year, third year, then you leave, and then traveling for a year, and everything was seen in this annual gap. Whereas now, I'm at a point where I'm able to look long term. I can think 5 years, 10 years, where do I want to take this thing? And by playing the long game, you take off a lot of pressure from the get-go, because it doesn't have to be like immediate success, but it also allows you to create a podcast and a business that I really want to do and I really enjoy. And that's the key thing with the long game. You got to enjoy it. You got to, want to talk to that guest, have a great conversation with them, edit it into a sick podcast that if one person listens to, I'll be really happy with it. Because that's how the long game is played. If you're not enjoying that ride, it's not going to last that long. And the nature of the podcast itself is there is no big exit. There's no kind of working hard for 3 years, head down, big exit. I'm not really down with that philosophy anyways. And my natural inclination has always been for endurance. I've always loved endurance running, endurance sports. I've always been good at just keeping on going, and not with any particular skill or talent, but just sort of outlasting everyone. And this is like one of the things, one of my sort of strategies I've been thinking about with podcasts and competition is just outlast them. You just keep going. And then at the point where most people want to quit because they're not seeing like the returns or whatever it is, you just keep going. And it makes for a very simple strategy of playing this long game. We're just outlasting. And yeah, everything improves with each episode. So just keep going. Something I've realized and really learned in doing this podcast is reaching out to guests and how to do that, how to sort of sell them into the podcast and get them on. Now, I know loads of you are really interested by this because it's like the number one question I get is like, how the hell do you get these guests on? You're so early on in the podcast. How do you get them on? And one thing that I've realized in the guest outreach is that it's not about the metrics. It's about the mission. It's about what you're trying to share with the world and what you're trying to build that brings them on board, rather than the kind of vanity metrics of podcasting and listeners. I'm sure at some point, like you definitely need to have that, but right now, particularly at the start, it's all about just bringing people on board, making them feel like they're kind of a part of this mission to kind of share the outdoors with people and really kind of make it cool and show people what great careers there are, and even just give them any inspiration to go on an expedition or to think like, oh wait, they did that. Maybe I could do that. And how did they do it? Well, let's listen and find out. So yeah, that has been a big surprise for me, reaching out to guests that I wasn't sure I'd be able to get on. And some were just be like, they're probably going to say no, but I'll do it anyways. Send them over a message, get talking to them. And the amount of people, it's not like in abundance, but there are great people out there who just love someone that is doing their thing. They've got a message to share with the world, and that relates to the one that they want to share with the world. And you can collaborate and have a really amazing conversation to help people and spread an awesome message. So yeah, that's been a big lesson. You can just buy them on with the mission, buy them on with the story, what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve. And people, if they like the sound of it, they'll come on because they're on board with it. So that's been a really sort of hope and humanity type thing. It's been a nice realization to have that. Next lesson for me is learning how to be in the conversation versus preparing really well for the conversation. So it's this idea of like, you got to be flexible and I need to be rigid. So it's a lesson around improving my hosting skills. And what I tend to do is I prepare sometimes too much, but I prepare loads for the conversation. And I prepare on like loads of little details that almost seem irrelevant to the conversations that if it does come up, I can bring in with a different angle. Like it might be like, what did their parents do for work or something like that? So I'll just make sure I find out all these details, all these bits of information. And I'm super prepared for an incredible conversation with that person. Because first of all, it just shows a level of respect. You know, they're giving their time, which ultimately is like the most important currency that we all have in our lives. They're giving time. So the least I can do is respect that time and make sure that I've done a really good amount of research to say kind of thank you for your time. But then also as podcast went on, I realized I was like constantly thinking about the next question whilst they're talking. Because like, okay, how do I keep the flow? How do I keep it going? It's just kind of this constant third party voice in my head, which is kind of looking at the conversation and being like, okay, how do we keep this thing going? But actually, sometimes just kind of got to shout at myself in my own head and just be like, just listen, just be in the conversation, just listen to what they're saying. And that will make for a much better conversation in itself. So yeah, I'm still working that out, this constant yin yang between preparation and rigidity and flexibility and going off the cuff and rolling with different tangents. But it's a skill. It's kind of like an art of conversation that I'm really enjoying learning. Next up on my learnings, now these are all sort of related. This is the last learning that I've learned doing the podcast, and it's just the unexpected learning curve. I think, you know, whenever you're starting your own thing, it's important to share with people that I don't really know what I'm doing. It's like I do know what I'm doing in the big scale of things, like I'm doing a podcast and the mission and the vision that I want to share with people and the guests I want to get on. But I don't know what I'm doing in terms of how to achieve that. So it's like I'm a video editor, I'm a guest outreach person, I'm a podcast host. What else we got here? A salesman. You know, you got to bring them in on the mission. I'm so many things. I'm also like just a full-time PA that has to like move dates around and make sure that there's going to be a chair when we get to the venue and bring in a tripod and a freaking technician as well, just doing all the tech, which is awful, to be honest. That's probably the worst bit. But once it's up and it's great. But yeah, it's been a really steep learning curve. I think when I go and set out and thought about doing a podcast, you think about the podcast itself. You think about just being sat there with the guest and how cool it'd be to talk to them. And that's great. That's the best bit, is the podcast. But there's so much around that to create this show, you know, to really keep it going and build this thing. And that learning curve has, it's been full on. It's, I think, something that's incredibly good for me because I like doing loads of different things. I like being like a jack of all trades. And I think it's also important at the start of this podcast just to know what it's like to do every single thing, and to understand what actually goes into making this. You know, rather than kind of, well, I wouldn't be able to anyways, but rather than kind of coming in with money and hiring a studio and getting a film production team and getting someone to do the guest research and stuff like that, it's like, you're not really living and breathing that thing. You're not understanding like the whole spectrum of what goes into making that podcast. So as much as it has been a steep learning curve, and at times just like looking at a download speed for half an hour, like, oh my God, when will this video load? I'm glad it's that way. I wouldn't have it any other way. I like the fact that it's raw. I like the fact that I need to do everything. And that leads on to this point I wanted to make about AI and how so much of what I do, I use AI to help, because these are like the times we live in now where you can start something and you can literally have AI do like a full-time job role. Like it helps me in editing. It saves me hours in editing, probably days. It saves loads of money. You can get to the point where you've got AI in so many different parts of the business that it's like a whole team that you'd be spending 5-8 grand on a month. And AI is there to do it all. It's crazy. And it's a massive help if you want to be starting your own thing. And that's why I wanted to sort of finish on this note, because times are changing. You've got, this is literally, I'm in my narrowboat at the moment. I'm frozen in, by the way. The boat's stuck because the water's frozen. It's bloody freezing in here. And I've got an iPhone and I've got a mic that I got from Amazon, and I'm using bloody Audacity sound system, which is free. How cool is that? How sick is that? Like, and I'm able to put this out to the world. It's like, how sick is that? You're living in this time. We're all living in this time where we've got AI which is able to do stuff for us. We've got a camera which we can share with the world through platforms like social media, and it's like, wow, what an exciting time to be alive and to be able to do your own thing. I really feel like there hasn't been a better time in history to pursue your own dream and put yourself out there to the world and be able to create something that is yours, and to really build something and invest that time in. So if there is anything out there that you're thinking about doing and thinking about building, I hope that this episode can help you in some way, whether it's a podcast where it's like obviously directly helps you, hopefully. But if there is anything out there, just learning, like all these adventures I've been speaking to, all these guests I've been having on, how they're all working things out, and how throughout that process of talking to them, I'm working things out with the podcast, and things get done, things get built, because you just live in this incredible time where you can do that, and you don't need to know anyone. You don't need to have an amazing education. You just got an idea and you can execute and go for it. So hopefully this has been a big help. I've managed to ramble on for about, a good amount of time on my own in the boat. So I hope that you guys love this episode. And on to 2026. Let's absolutely smash it. We've got some really cool guests line up, and we're going to keep this party rocking. Thanks a lot for coming along on this podcast journey so far. I hope you enjoyed all of these reflections and learnings that I've got from the pod. And let me know if you enjoy this type of episode where it's just me talking to the camera, reflecting on what's going on and the guests I've got. Just comment on Spotify or YouTube, or give it a thumbs up. Cheers, guys. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.